2 years ago, I was immersed in the grief of loss, thinking nothing could shake me anymore. But then, an unexpected package arrived at my door, pure, artisanal honey, sent by my ex-mother-in-law. A gesture of peace? I don't think so, but before I tell you what happened, subscribe to the channel and help us continue sharing real and impactful stories like this one. I never imagined a simple package on my doorstep could change everything. It was an ordinary Tuesday in Austin, the September heat still heavy in the air, and I had just gotten home from work when I saw the brown box waiting for me. There was no visible sender, just my name handwritten in a script that made my stomach churn. I recognized it immediately: Margaret Coleman, my former mother-in-law. 2 years since David's funeral, 2 years of absolute silence, and now this. I picked up the box with trembling hands, feeling its weight. It wasn't heavy, but it carried something much denser than its physical contents. Charlie, my African gray parrot, called from the living room as if sensing my tension. "What do you want now, Margaret?" I murmured, stepping into the house. The air conditioning greeted me with relief, but the feeling of discomfort clung to my skin like a second layer. I set the box on the kitchen table and stared at it for long minutes, as if it were a bomb about to explode. My life had found a rhythm in the last few months. Work, home, Charlie, and the memories of David I carried like a heavy but comforting blanket. At 42, I had learned to live alone again, something I hadn't done since my early 20s. The house in Cedar Park, which David and I had bought when we moved from Oklahoma, still echoed with our history together. Every corner held a memory: the kitchen where we made breakfast on Sundays, the living room where we watched bad movies and laughed until our stomachs hurt. Charlie had been a gift from David to me 3 years ago, when I was going through a rough patch at work. "He'll be your companion when I'm not there," David had said, unaware of how prophetic those words would become. Now Charlie was all I had left of him, a feathered guardian who knew my every secret and mood. The bird watched me from his perch in the living room, tilting his head with that unsettling intelligence parrots possess. "What do you think, Charlie? Should I open it?" I asked, but he just stared at me silently. Margaret had always been a shadowy presence in my life with David. From our first meeting, when David took me to meet her in Tulsa, I felt the hostility radiating from her like heat from a furnace. She never forgave us for moving to Texas so soon after we got married. David had gotten an incredible promotion at a tech company in Austin, and it was our chance to start over. "You're stealing my son from me," she had said in our last argument, 3 years ago, during Christmas. David tried to mediate as he always did, but I saw something in her eyes that haunted me: pure, calculating hatred. She never accepted that David chose to build a life with me, away from her suffocating influence. When David died in the accident, she didn't even come to the funeral. She sent flowers with a cold card: "My condolences." Nothing more. The lawyer told me she had challenged the will, claiming I didn't deserve to inherit anything. David had left everything to me: the house, the investments, the life insurance. Margaret received only a few personal mementos and a small sum. She never forgave me for that either. I opened the box carefully, as if I were defusing a bomb. Inside, wrapped in pink tissue paper, was a glass jar of golden honey, with a handmade label that read, "Oklahoma Wild Honey Coleman Farm." A card was attached with a red ribbon. My heart leaped as I read the words written in the same elegant handwriting: "Dear Sarah, I know we've been through hard times, but life is too short to hold grudges. David always wanted us to be close, and I'd like to honor his memory by trying to start over. This honey is from the family farm, something special that David always loved. I hope we can talk soon and heal the wounds of the past. Love, Margaret." The words seemed sincere on the paper, but something inside me rebelled against them. Margaret had never shown me genuine affection, not even in the early days of my relationship with David. But why after 2 years of silence? I held the jar up to the light. The honey glowed like liquid amber, seemingly perfect. Charlie screamed from the living room again, a high-pitched sound that cut through the air like a warning siren. I took the jar to the kitchen, planning to make my evening tea, a sacred routine I'd maintained since David's death. It was my moment of peace, when I processed the day and mentally chatted with him. Charlie always accompanied me, perched on my shoulder like a silent confidant. I put the kettle on and grabbed my favorite cup, a blue mug David had given me for our first anniversary. The honey sat on the counter, tempting and golden, promising sweetness to soothe the bitterness I still carried in my chest. But when I opened the jar, Charlie, who had been peacefully perched on his perch, began to stir violently. His feathers ruffled, he flapped his wings frantically, and he made a sound I'd never heard before, a high-pitched, desperate cry that chilled me. "Charlie, what's wrong?" I asked, approaching him. But when I took the jar of honey with me, he became even more agitated, pecking the air toward the jar as if trying to warn me of something. His eyes, normally calm and observant, were wide in a way that scared the hell out of me. Charlie's behavior left me completely disconcerted. In 3 years of living with me, he had never reacted like this to food. He was a curious bird, always interested in what I was eating or preparing, but never aggressive or agitated like this. I placed the honey jar back on the counter and approached him slowly, reaching out to calm him. "It's okay, Charlie. It's just honey," I whispered, but he remained agitated, staring at the jar as if it were his worst enemy. A strange feeling began to grow in my chest, a mixture of confusion and a foreboding I couldn't quite name. David always said Charlie was especially intelligent, able to perceive things we humans miss. "He has a sixth sense," David would joke. But now, seeing the bird's extreme reaction, I wondered if there wasn't more truth to those words than I'd imagined. I turned off the kettle and put the honey away in the pantry, deciding that my tea that night would be unsweetened. Charlie immediately calmed down when the pot was out of sight, returning to his normal behavior as if nothing had happened. That night, lying in the bed I once shared with David, I couldn't stop thinking about Margaret's gift and Charlie's reaction. The full moon streamed in through the window, illuminating the room with a silvery light that made everything more mysterious. I turned over every word on the card, every nuance of the handwriting, trying to decipher the true intentions behind that seemingly kind gesture. Margaret never did anything without an ulterior motive. She was a calculating woman who always had ulterior motives. David told me stories about his childhood, how she manipulated situations to get what she wanted. "My mother is complicated," he would say, "but she loves me in her own way." I always wondered if that love was genuine or possessive. Now, alone in the dark, with Charlie sleeping peacefully in the living room, a question lingered in my mind. Why, after 2 years of silence and hostility, had Margaret chosen this moment to attempt a reconciliation? And why had Charlie, my faithful and intuitive companion, reacted with such fear to a simple jar of honey? Something was wrong, I could feel it in my bones, but I didn't know what yet. The next morning arrived with a gray sky that perfectly matched my mood. I woke early, even before my alarm went off, with the feeling that something had changed overnight. Charlie was quieter than usual, watching me with those intelligent eyes as I made coffee. The morning routine always calmed me: strong coffee, whole wheat toast, and the local news on television. But today, every movement seemed charged with a tension I couldn't explain. The jar of honey remained in the pantry, like a secret kept behind the closed door. I tried to focus on the work ahead. I had an important presentation for a client at the digital marketing firm where I work as a creative director. But my mind kept returning to Margaret and her unexpected gift. "Maybe I'm paranoid," I muttered to Charlie, who tilted his head as if considering my observation. The coffee was too bitter, even with sugar, and I found myself wishing for a little honey to sweeten it. The thought made me shiver involuntarily. During breakfast, I decided to test it. I grabbed the jar of honey from the pantry, just to observe Charlie's reaction again. Maybe yesterday he was just tired or stressed for some reason I couldn't grasp. Parrots are sensitive to changes in their environment, and perhaps the different scent of the homemade honey had bothered him. But the moment I opened the pantry and grabbed the jar, Charlie exploded into an even more intense agitation than the night before. His feathers stood on end, he beat his wings hard against the cage bars, and emitted a series of high-pitched screams that nearly made me drop the jar. "Charlie, stop!" I yelled, startled by the intensity of his reaction. But he didn't stop. He continued screaming and thrashing as if trying to warn me of mortal danger. His eyes were fixed on the jar of honey with an intensity that chilled me. I'd never seen an animal react this way to food, and Charlie was familiar with all the types of foods I ate. I quickly put the jar back in the pantry, and once again he calmed down instantly. My memory took me back to a Christmas 3 years ago, the last time I was at Margaret's house in Tulsa. David and I had driven 5 hours to spend the holidays with her in an attempt to maintain family peace. Her house was spotless, every object in its place, every surface gleaming as if photographed for a magazine. But there was something suffocating about that perfection, something that made me feel like an intruder. Margaret had prepared an elaborate dinner, and throughout the meal, she made subtle comments about how I was changing David, how different he had been since marrying me. "You know he's always been a homebody," she said, serving dessert. "He's never been one for adventure or change." I knew it was a lie. David was adventurous and dreamed of exploring the world with me. But Margaret had a disturbing ability to twist reality to fit her narrative. That night, she offered me tea with special honey from the family farm. I drank it, but I spent the entire night with a stomachache. David said I had probably eaten too much, but now, looking at the jar of honey in my pantry, a terrible suspicion began to form. I couldn't concentrate on my work. During the client meeting, my mind was torn between the presentation and the disturbing memories that kept surfacing. I remembered other occasions when Margaret had offered me food or drink, always with that sweet smile that never reached her eyes. There was always a strange insistence, as if it were crucial that I consume what she offered. David never noticed. He saw his mother through the rose-tinted glasses of childhood, unable to perceive the subtle manipulation I felt in my skin. I returned home early, claiming a headache that wasn't entirely false. Charlie greeted me with his usual cheerful shout, but I noticed he avoided looking toward the kitchen. It was as if he knew danger lurked there. I decided to try an experiment that made my stomach churn just thinking about it. I picked one of my favorite plants from the living room, a delicate fern David gave me for our second anniversary, and brought it into the kitchen. If Charlie was right about the honey, I needed to find out why. With trembling hands, I opened the honey jar and grabbed a small spoon. Charlie immediately began fussing again, but this time I paid attention to every detail of his reaction. He wasn't just agitated, he was desperate, as if he were trying to communicate something urgent to me. His cries had a pattern, almost as if it were a language I should understand. "It's okay, Charlie, I get it," I whispered, my voice shaking. "You're trying to protect me, aren't you?" I sprinkled a small amount of honey on the soil around the fern, away from the main roots, just enough to test my terrible theory. The plant was healthy and vibrant, its green fronds swaying gently in the air-conditioning breeze. If nothing happened, I would know I was being paranoid. If something did, I didn't even want to think about the implications. Charlie calmed down a bit when I put the jar away, but he continued to watch me with an intensity that made me feel like he was trying to tell me something important. I checked the time on my phone, 3:47 p.m. Now it was just a matter of waiting. The next few hours passed in slow agony. I tried to distract myself by organizing papers, answering emails, anything to keep from staring obsessively at the fern. But my eyes kept returning to it, searching for signs of change. Charlie remained quiet but alert, like a sentinel standing guard. At 6:30, 3 hours after the test, I noticed the first change. The edges of some leaves were beginning to yellow, not the natural yellowing of autumn, but a sickly discoloration that made my blood run cold. By 7:15, several leaves were visibly wilted, drooping as if they had lost all vitality. By 8 p.m., the part of the plant that had been exposed to the honey was clearly dying. The leaves were brown at the edges, wilted, and brittle to the touch. My healthy fern, which had survived 2 years of loving care, was being destroyed by a small amount of Margaret's artisanal honey. I sat on the kitchen floor, trembling, as the terrible reality set in. My ex-mother-in-law had tried to poison me. Night fell over Austin like a heavy blanket, but I barely noticed the darkness outside. I sat in the living room, staring at Charlie, who had become my unlikely hero. If not for his instinctive reaction, I would have consumed the honey without hesitation. How many spoonfuls would I have put in my tea? How many nights would I have sweetened my drink with poison, unaware that it was slowly killing me? Betrayal cut deeper than fear. Margaret not only wanted to hurt me, She wanted to do it cowardly and silently, letting me die slowly while feigning concern. "Thank you, Charlie," I whispered, extending my finger for him to caress with his beak. "You saved my life." But now I faced an even more haunting question: what to do with this discovery? I had no concrete evidence, just a dead plant and a parrot's intuition. Who would believe me? And more importantly, if Margaret was willing to poison me once, what would stop her from trying again? The war had begun, and I didn't even know I was fighting. But now he knew, and that changed everything. I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay in the dark, listening to the nighttime sounds of Austin, the distant traffic on I-35, the hum of the air conditioner, the crickets in the garden, as my mind processed the magnitude of what I had discovered. Margaret had crossed a line I never imagined anyone in the family could cross. Tempted murder. The words echoed in my head like a sinister mantra. At 6 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep and got up with a clear purpose. I needed scientific evidence. Charlie greeted me with a soft cry, as if he understood we had work to do. I grabbed the jar of honey from the pantry. Charlie immediately fussed, but this time I reassured him. "I know, Kit, but now we're going to use it against her." I placed the jar in a plastic bag, sealing it carefully. I knew a private lab in downtown Austin that did discreet toxicology tests. Dr. James Morrison, an old friend from college who now ran Austin Forensic Labs. If anyone could help me without asking complicated questions, it would be him. The drive to the lab was tense. Each red light seemed like an eternity, each curve made me grip the steering wheel tighter. The jar of honey was on the passenger seat, wrapped like criminal evidence, which I suspected was exactly what it was. Austin was waking up to another hot September day, people heading to work, kids waiting for the school bus, normal life going on while I loaded poison into my car. I called the office and called in sick. It wasn't a lie, I felt physically ill from the discovery. James welcomed me into his private lab, a modern space filled with sophisticated equipment that looked like something out of a science fiction movie. "Sarah, what a surprise. How long has it been?" he said, hugging me warmly. But his expression changed when he saw my face. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse than that," I replied, pulling the jar from the bag. "I need you to analyze this for me." Discreetly. His eyes narrowed, immediately grasping the seriousness of the situation. James didn't ask unnecessary questions, one of the qualities I've always admired in him. "Suspected contamination?" he asked, donning gloves and examining the jar. "Suspected intentional poisoning," I replied, my voice firmer than I expected. He stopped what he was doing and looked me straight in the eye. "Sarah, this is serious. If you suspect intentional poisoning, you should be talking to the police, not me." "I know, but I need to be sure first. I need solid evidence before making accusations that could destroy a family." He nodded, understanding the sensitivity of the situation. "I can run a full analysis: heavy metals, organic toxins, pesticides, synthetic substances. It will take 24 hours for preliminary results, 48 for a full report." As he prepared the samples, I told him the whole story. Margaret, the seemingly caring card, Charlie's reaction, the plant test. James listened silently, his expression growing darker with each detail. "Parrots have extremely sensitive respiratory systems," he commented. "If Charlie reacted like that, there's definitely something wrong with this honey." The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I tried to maintain my normal routine: work, home, caring for Charlie, but every moment was permeated by a growing anxiety. What if I was wrong? What if it was just paranoia caused by grief and isolation? But then I'd look at the dead fern, which I'd removed from the living room and placed in the garage as evidence, and I knew I wasn't imagining things. Charlie remained close to me throughout the day, as if sensing my tension. I picked up my phone several times to call James, but I forced myself to wait. Science took time, and I needed accurate results. That night, I tried watching Netflix to distract myself, but I couldn't focus on anything. Every sound in the house made me jump. The ice falling in the refrigerator, the air conditioner turning on, Charlie stirring in his cage. It was as if I were expecting Margaret to appear at my door at any moment, asking if I liked the gift. The thought made me lock all the doors and double-check the windows before trying to sleep. The phone rang at 10:30 the next morning. It was James, and the tone of his voice told me everything before he even spoke. "Sarah, you need to come here now. And maybe you should bring a lawyer." My stomach dropped. "Is it that bad?" "Worse. We found arsenic in significant concentrations, mixed to be released slowly. Whoever made this knew exactly what they were doing. There are also traces of other compounds that suggest this was specifically prepared to cause gradual poisoning." My legs went weak and I had to sit down. Arsenic. The word echoed in my head like a death knell. How long would I have if you had consumed it regularly? Depending on the amount, a few weeks to a few months. Symptoms would start with fatigue and digestive problems, then progress to more serious issues. It's a cowardly poison, Sarah. Designed to look like natural death. I hung up the phone with trembling hands. Margaret didn't just want to kill me. She wanted to make me suffer first, make me slowly waste away while she watched, feigning concern. I sat on the kitchen floor, where it had all begun, and let reality sink in. My ex-mother-in-law, the woman who had raised the man I loved, had tried to murder me. Not in a moment of anger or passion, but in a calculated and cruel way. She had planned it, prepared the poison, written that fake card, and sent it all with the expectation that I would die slowly, without her ever suspecting it. Charlie came to me, walking across the floor with that clumsy way parrots have outside their cages. He climbed onto my arm and rested his head against my neck, as if comforting me. "You knew, didn't you?" I whispered to him. "You smelled death in that jar." Tears began to fall, not of sadness, but of a pure, crystalline rage I had never felt before. Margaret had underestimated two things: Charlie's loyalty and my fighting spirit. Had she wanted a silent war? Now she would have a war, but on my terms. I picked up my phone and did something that surprised me. I called Margaret. My heart pounded like a drum as the phone rang, but my voice was calm and collected when she answered. "Margaret? It's Sarah. I received your gift yesterday and wanted to thank you." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost feel her surprise. "Oh, Sarah dear. It's so good to hear your voice. Did you like the honey?" The false sweetness in her voice made me nauseous, but I kept my tone friendly. "I loved it. Actually, I was wondering if you had more. It's so special, so unique." Another pause, longer this time. "Of course, dear. I can send you more. I'm glad you liked it." "Wonderful. And Margaret, maybe we can talk soon. You were right about healing the wounds of the past." When I hung up, my hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was pure adrenaline. Margaret had taken the bait, confirming her intentions with her willingness to send more of the poison. Now I had scientific evidence and a partial confession recorded on my phone. But that was just the beginning. If Margaret wanted to play the manipulation game, I was ready to show her how to play it to win. The next few days turned into an Oscar-worthy performance. I called Margaret again the next day, this time with a carefully planned script in my head. "Margaret, I need to tell you something," I began, letting my voice sound slightly worried. "Since I started using the honey, I've been feeling a little strange. Nothing serious, just tired. Maybe it's the stress of work." The silence on the other end of the line lasted too long to be natural. "Oh dear, that's too bad. Maybe you should see a doctor," she finally replied, but there was something in her voice, a barely concealed satisfaction, that made my blood boil. "You think so? I don't want to exaggerate. Maybe it's just a coincidence." No, you should take care of your health. And keep taking the honey, dear. It's very nutritious. It will do you good." Every word was a veiled confession, every piece of advice a confirmation of her murderous intent. I hung up the phone and looked at Charlie, who had been watching the entire conversation with those intelligent eyes. "She really thinks she's winning," I murmured. The recording app on my phone had captured every word. Margaret called me 3 days later, the first time in 2 years she'd taken the initiative to reach out. "Sarah, honey, how are you feeling?" The false concern in her voice was so obvious I almost laughed. "Worse, actually," I replied, forcing weakness into my voice. I've been having terrible stomach pains and fatigue I can't explain. I went to the doctor yesterday. A lie, of course, but I needed to see how far she would go. Oh my God. What did the doctor say? The anxiety in her voice was real now. She was worried I'd discover the truth too soon. He said it might be stress or maybe a nutritional deficiency. He prescribed some supplements and told me to get more rest. What a relief, she sighed, and I could feel her satisfaction through the phone. You know, honey, I was thinking about visiting you. It's been so long, and with you not feeling well. My blood ran cold. The thought of Margaret in my house, pretending to care for me while watching me slowly die, was more terrifying than any horror movie. That would be wonderful, I lied, but I don't want you to take what I have. Maybe when I'm better. That night, I sat in my home office and began researching Margaret Coleman online. If she'd been planning this for a while, there must have been a digital trail. I found her social media, which she rarely used, but there had been something interesting there in the past few months. Several searches for natural remedies and Oklahoma medicinal plants. A post about how nature offers solutions to all problems. But what really caught my attention was a photo posted 3 months ago. Margaret at a health food fair, holding a jar of honey identical to the one she'd sent me. The caption read, "Learning about the healing powers of the earth's products." Healing. The irony made me laugh bitterly. I kept digging and found something even more disturbing. Margaret had done several searches about arsenic on gardening websites, disguised as pest control questions. She had planned this meticulously, creating a trail of evidence that made her look like an innocent grandmother interested in natural remedies. But each search, each post, now revealed itself as part of a murderous plot. A week after my first call, Margaret called me again. This time, her voice carried a barely concealed urgency. "Sarah, how are you, dear? I'm so worried." "Very bad," I replied, my voice sounding weak and shaky. "The doctors are confused. My symptoms are getting worse, but they can't pinpoint what it is. I'm starting to get scared." The silence that followed was revealing. Margaret was calculating, deciding how much she could push without arousing suspicion. "Honey, have you been using the honey I sent? Maybe you should take more. Sometimes natural remedies need time to work." Bingo. She was literally instructing me to consume more poison. "You think so? I've been using only a spoonful in my evening tea. Maybe 2 spoonfuls, 3 times a day. And Sarah," her voice grew softer, more manipulative, "you haven't mentioned the honey to the doctors, have you? They don't understand natural remedies. They might discourage you from using something that's actually helping you." Every word was a rope she was weaving for her own strength. "Actually, Margaret," I continued, feigning hesitation, "I have a confession to make. I haven't used the honey much yet. You know, I've always been skeptical of home remedies. But if you think it can help me..." "Oh, honey, you must. It's from the family farm, a special recipe passed down for generations. David always said our honey had special properties." The mention of David made my fists clench. She was using the memory of my dead husband to convince me to poison myself. Did he really say that? I asked, real emotion seeping into my voice. "Always. He used to say our honey could cure anything. Sarah, promise me you'll use it more. For David. He'd want to know I'm watching over you." The tears that streamed down my face were real, not of sadness, but of anger so intense it left me shaking. Margaret was desecrating David's memory, using his love for me as a weapon to destroy me. "I promise," I whispered, "I'll use more honey. For David." When I hung up, I had yet another incriminating recording and a promise I never intended to keep. Margaret became incredibly attentive over the next few weeks. She called every other day, always inquiring about my health and always insisting on the honey. She even sent a second jar, in case the first one was gone. I didn't even open this one. It went straight to James in the lab, who confirmed the same poisonous composition. "She's escalating," James told me during our secret meeting. "The arsenic concentration in this second batch is higher. She's getting impatient." Each conversation with Margaret became more sinister. She began asking specific questions about my symptoms, as if monitoring the poison's progress. Have you been feeling nauseous? Pigs. Trouble sleeping? When I confirmed any symptoms, all fabricated, she seemed satisfied. It's normal, dear. Your body is detoxing. Keep up the honey. Her audacity was astonishing. Margaret had convinced herself she was the perfect assassin, carrying out the perfect crime. She had no idea that every word, every poisonous piece of advice, was being recorded and documented. The final call came 3 weeks after the first contact. Margaret was clearly frustrated with the slow pace of my decline. Sarah, I'm very worried. Maybe I should come and take care of you myself. Her voice held an urgency that made me realize she was losing her patience. I can bring you more honey, the strongest kind we have on the farm. Stronger. She was literally offering a lethal dose. Margaret, I replied, my voice sounding extremely weak, I think you're right. I need help. But before you come, I need to tell you something. I'm afraid that it might not get better. If anything happens to me, I want you to know that I forgive everything that happened between us. David would be happy to know we've made peace. The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, she spoke, and her voice was filled with an emotion that made my blood run cold. Pure satisfaction. Oh, dear Sarah, don't talk like that. You'll be fine. I'll take care of everything. When I hung up, I knew I had everything I needed. Margaret had just confessed, veiled but clear, her intention to kill me. Now it was time to turn the tables completely. On Monday morning, I walked to the Austin police station with a briefcase full of evidence and a determination that burned in my chest like fire. Detective Maria Rodriguez greeted me in her office, a middle-aged woman with discerning eyes that immediately grasped the seriousness of the situation. Mrs. Mitchell, I understand you have information about an attempted murder? I placed the briefcase on her desk and began to tell her the whole story, from the unexpected gift to the incriminating recordings. I showed her the lab reports, the recordings of the phone conversations, the screenshots of Margaret's online research on arsenic. Detective Rodriguez listened silently, her expression growing more somber with each piece of evidence presented. This is meticulous, she finally said. Your ex-mother-in-law clearly planned this for months. And you have it all documented perfectly. Charlie was with me in his carrier. I had insisted on bringing him as a witness to the first discovery. Even at the police station, he would get agitated whenever I mentioned honey, as if he was still trying to protect me. What impresses me most, Detective Rodriguez continued, is how you remained calm and collected evidence instead of confronting her directly. Many people would have exploded and lost the chance of a conviction. I explained how Charlie's reaction had saved me, how each call from Margaret had become more incriminating. She became overconfident. She thought she was dealing with a helpless victim, not someone who was documenting her every move. The detective smiled for the first time. Well, Mrs. Mitchell, we have enough evidence for an arrest. But I'd like to suggest something that might give us a full confession. How about one last call to her, this time with our team monitoring her? My heart raced. The idea of speaking to Margaret again made me sick, but if it would ensure she paid for her crimes, I would do it. What do you want me to say? Tell her you're dying. That the doctors discovered arsenic poisoning and that you suspect someone tried to kill you. Let's see if she turns herself in. An hour later, I sat in an interrogation room with professional recording equipment, surrounded by detectives and technicians. My hand shook slightly as I dialed Margaret's number, but my voice was steady when she answered. Margaret, it's me, Sarah. I need to talk to you. Honey, how are you? Your voice sounds different. I'm in the hospital, Margaret. The doctors, they discovered something terrible. I paused dramatically, letting the silence stretch. They found arsenic in my blood. Someone tried to poison me. The silence that followed was so long I thought she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, higher, nervous. Arsenic? But how? Who would do such a thing? I don't know, Margaret. I'm scared. The doctor said if I hadn't stopped consuming the source of the poison when I did, I could have died. What source? Her voice was almost a whisper now. They're testing everything I've eaten in the last few weeks. including that honey you sent me. What happened next was better than any confession we could have hoped for. Margaret exploded. You can't test the honey. But, I mean, it would be a waste of time. It's pure honey from the family farm. Margaret, why are you so nervous? It's just honey, right? Of course it's just honey. But Sarah, you don't understand, you shouldn't be alive. The words were out before she could stop herself, and the silence that followed was deafening. Detective Rodriguez made a gesture of silent victory. What do you mean by that, Margaret? I didn't mean. Sarah, you stole my son from me. You took him away, and when he died, you took everything that should have been mine. That house, the money, everything. You didn't deserve any of it. Her voice was rising, years of resentment finally seeping through. David loved me more than you. I raised him, I knew him before you were in his life. And you just showed up and took it all away. So you decided to kill me? I decided to get justice. You should have died in that accident, not him. The full confession poured out like a burst dam. Margaret told everything. How she had researched arsenic for months, how she had tested different concentrations in plants before preparing the honey, how she had planned to visit me to take care of me as I slowly died. It was going to be perfect, she sobbed now. You were going to die of natural causes, and I was going to inherit everything as David's only remaining family. It was going to be justice at last. But, Margaret, you tried to murder me. How is that justice? Because you don't deserve to live the life that should have been mine. That house, that money, all of it should go back to the Coleman family. You're an interloper, always have been. Detective Rodriguez signaled to the team. They had more than enough. Margaret, I said, my voice now firm and controlled, you made a fatal mistake. You underestimated my intelligence and overestimated your own cunning. And most importantly, you never counted on Charlie. Who is Charlie? She asked, confused. My parrot. He smelled death in your gift and saved me. Ironic, isn't it? The last gift David gave me ended up being the one that protected me from your evil. 2 hours later, Margaret Coleman was being arrested at her Tulsa home for attempted premeditated murder. Oklahoma police cooperated fully, especially after listening to the recordings. They found more evidence in her home, printed research on poisons, handwritten recipes for special honey, and even a diary where she had documented her plans in gruesome detail. Day 15, Sarah should be starting to feel the effects now. I called to check, she seems weaker. Day 22, I sent the second batch. This time I increased the concentration. She can't last much longer. Day 30, maybe I should visit her in person. I want to see the pain in her eyes before the end. Each entry was further evidence of premeditation and malice. Detective Rodriguez called me that night. Mrs. Mitchell, I rarely see a case so well documented. Your ex-mother-in-law will spend a long time in prison. How long? With premeditated attempted murder, plus the evidence of extensive planning, probably 15 to 20 years. At her age, that's practically a life sentence. 6 months later, I sat in my Austin yard, watching Charlie play in his outdoor cage under the hot Texas sun. Margaret had pleaded guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence, 18 years with no possibility of parole for the first 12. During the trial, she tried to claim she was mentally distraught from grief, but her detailed diary and months of planning proved clear premeditation. She looked at me one last time in the courtroom, and I saw not regret, but pure rage at having been caught, not at having tried to kill me. That told me everything I needed to know about who Margaret really was. Now, for the first time in 2 years, I felt true peace. Justice had been served, not just for me, but for David as well. His mother had tried to destroy the woman he loved, and now she would pay the price. Thank you, Charlie, I whispered to my feathered hero. You didn't just save my life, you gave me back my freedom. Charlie bowed his head and emitted a soft cry, as if to say, "You're welcome." Finally, I was free to live the life David would have wanted for me. A life without fear, without poison, without Margaret Coleman.